It can be hard to accept some bitter truths in life, like Santa not being real or that Frozen isn't as good as people constantly bang on about. The same can be applied to video games, in that those we once thought were absolutely fantastic are actually not that great. It could be that we've removed the nostalgia blinkers and tried playing them in recent times, only to discover they're not as fun as they used to be. Or it might be down to the dreaded live service implementation that has ruined an otherwise fine game, meaning that anyone jumping in now is going to be met with some steep price hiking and grind. It may even be that time hasn't been kind to these following games, proving that whilst they may have been the high point of advancement some years ago, actually play more like a shopping trolley with 3 broken wheels now. But hear me out. Take off those rose-tinted glasses and contain that rage as we look at some once proud games that are not as great as you think they used to be. Oh, I'm gonna catch such hell for these. I'm Kirsten from WhatCulture, and these are 10 awesome video games that are terrible now. Number 10, Silent Hill KONAMI. When Resident Evil burst onto the scene in 1996, people tore it to shreds for its shonky voice acting. Yet when Silent Hill did it some 3 years later, people were oddly okay with it. Like Resi had set some kind of bar and that was fine. Yet looking back, it's easy to see why people forgave Silent Hill. It brought some genuine terror to the genre, whilst Resi had diverged into more action-based territory. But what made the first Silent Hill good then is nothing special now. There's a reason the sequel is considered to be the best one. KONAMI took it seriously, adding real emotion to the characters and depth to their stories. Comparatively, Harry Mason sounds almost annoyed in the search for his missing daughter, let alone terrified. Even the local police officer, Sybil Bennett, sounds like she couldn't give a monkey's arse about your lost child. Again, much like Resident Evil, it should be seen as a rough template of what their respective series would go on to do. As a standalone entry though, it's not aged well. Number 9, LA Noire by Team BONDI. Rockstar and Team BONDI's attempt at making LA Confidential, the game, was an ambitious piece of work when it finally came to fruition in 2011. The motion capture performances were above and beyond what we'd seen before, as well as the depth of the crime scene investigations you carry out. But when you go all CSI on the game itself, with a modern take on it, it's actually a bit of a hot mess. You'll begin to notice the weirdly disjointed connection between the heads and the bodies of the characters. Such was the focus on the ability to read realistic faces, it seems like the rest of a person was a secondary thought. And as for the story, it's just so erratic. Cole suddenly has an affair, didn't really convey that stinger watching him go to a jazz club on occasion. Suddenly you're Jack Kelso fighting goons with a flamethrower. What happened to harsh interrogation? It feels like a game that had its overall story laid out for it, but had to pad it out with flimsy cases and false leads to double its length. Number 8, System Shock 2, EA. The go-to for modern-day twists in narrative that most people go to is the famous "Would You Kindly" from BioShock, and rightly so, it was incredible, but people often forget their predecessor, System Shock 2, pulled a great one of its own some 10 years prior. Seen as one of the pinnacles of PC first-person shooters back in 1999, System Shock 2 was part of a wave of story-driven experiences that moved first-person shooters on from the likes of Quake and Doom. Gone were the simple run-and-gun affairs, instead replaced by tactical role-playing games with a first-person perspective. Yet, looking back at it now, it was a game that tried too hard with its skill system. It was far too easy to invest too much time in one style of play and effectively make the game far more hard than it should have been from that point onward. And while it may have paved the way for BioShock, was the twist in this game really fooling anyone? It was bold for its time, but now it would just be way too obvious. Shodan is literally the face of the game. Number 7, GoldenEye N64, Rare. Proximity mines, slappers only, golden gun mode, no odd job. All the memories are there, but sadly, that's where they should stay. For you see, whilst GoldenEye might have been the greatest thing since sliced bread many years ago, it has aged terribly. Kind of like a loaf of sliced bread, funnily enough. The N64 controller alone is a torturous beast to wield, let alone get your head around the shooting mechanic. So you move with the thumbstick and you strafe with the C buttons, but if you want to aim, you hold the R bumper and thumbstick whilst using C down to crouch. It was a logistical nightmare. But we somehow managed it. Nowadays, it'd be about as intuitive as a power glove. Honestly, try and have a multiplayer match with your mates now. You'll spend the first game trying to remember how to swap weapons or what buttons open doors, or you'll get fed up with the insane amounts of lag. All of that in a local multiplayer game too. Number 6, Resident Evil 4, Capcom. Way back before Tomb Raider did it, or even Syndicate threw their hat in, and missed. With a reboot, Resident Evil was already ahead of the curve back in 2005. At the time, it was phenomenal. It turned the whole fixed camera, tank-controlled world of Resi we all know and love completely on its head, and it brought in a new era of survival horror games in its wake, which I suppose also became its downfall. For whilst it may have been revolutionary at the time, we've had better examples of horror since. Dead Space gave us gory scares, while The Evil Within gave us the dark and foreboding terror. Looking back at Resident Evil 4, it gave us a mostly brightly lit action game until the thinly disguised veil of horror. What doesn't help is the constant porting of it either. The more it gets HD'd and remastered, the brighter it becomes. It doesn't help a 15-year-old game, that's for sure. Looking back, neither does tying the aiming to the movement stick. And let's not get started on those Ashley escort missions. Still, it's better than Resident Evil 6. Number 5, Sonic Adventure, SEGA. It's so very, very easy to drag Sonic 06 through the ringer because of how bloody awful it is, but no one ever really remembers just how craptastic Sonic's first proper transition was back on the Dreamcast. Even more unbelievably, it went on to sell 2.5 million copies, which is surprising as I wouldn't have pictured that many people owning Dreamcasts. I was 6 when it came out, and so, being such a wee lass, I would watch my cousin play the games he had on his Dreamcast. Did my young mind know what glitches and bugs and insanely terrible dialogue, complete with awful lip-syncing were at the time? Not at all. It was a new Sonic game. Yet now, with the keen eye and jaded cynicism that comes with age and a lot of bad video games since, it's bloody awful. The 2006 version holds nothing on how badly this plays, so much so it's almost like they used it as a reference. It's not surprising the director's cut versions reviewed badly. The smoke and mirrors had been removed, and we all saw how bad it was. Number 4, Mass Effect, BioWare. If a compliment sandwich in the workplace is a good thing, as in good thing, bad thing, good thing, then the Mass Effect trilogy is the opposite of that. BioWare started off with a bland slice, filled with all your favourite fillings, then capped off with a stale, crusty bit that no one wanted. Torture metaphor aside, the first Mass Effect really isn't that great when it's under the scrutiny scope. There's a whole wealth of ideas in there, but it's all spread too thin, and everything just feels okay to play. The combat is rough, with a cover system that didn't get improved on until the sequel. The inventory and equipment management was an absolute bloat, and as for the exploration, the less said about Mako, the better. At the time, we'd never seen anything like it. The hype was real, and aided by the tabloid damnation of interactive sex scenes, which probably helped its reach, Mass Effect did well, and rightfully so, otherwise we wouldn't have had Mass Effect 2. But the biggest complaint about the first one, who on the Citadel thought the film grain visual effect was a good idea? Number 3, Grand Theft Auto 3, ROCKSTAR. Some games survived the transition from 2D to 3D, some crash and burn. Mario made it, Earthworm Jim and Bubsy didn't. Grand Theft Auto already had 2 hits on its hands, and weirdly a British-themed expansion pack, that it could have comfortably made a third game in the same mould. Yet they didn't. They went full 3D with Grand Theft Auto 3, and boy did it make an impact. Shifting 14 million units by 2008, 7 years after release, it's safe to say it was a crowd pleaser. Crime had never been so much fun, unless you're Jack Thompson, of course. But going back now, and you can add Vice City into this one as well, they have not aged well, not even comparatively to GTA 5, but as a standalone title to play. The combat is insanely difficult at times, and you stand there and take hits. Driving has no weight to it, with cars handling as well as cows on an icy field. Also, isn't it weird how we take talking protagonists for granted now? It seems absurd now that they didn't give Claude anything to say. At least Rockstar learnt from it. Number 2, Half-Life, Valve. Again, like System Shock earlier, Half-Life raised the bar on what PC first-person shooters could do by adding some narrative drive and direction over shoot things and don't stop running. But whilst at the time it was absolutely incredible, let's not kid ourselves here. We all know the sequel, Half-Life 2, is where the money was. That game blew this one out of the water, with its story, its insane variety in weaponry and combat, and the brilliant use of physics and platforming. Oh, and the gravity gun, of course. Going back now to the first one as a retrospective is just basic. It plays like a beta of what Half-Life will go on to do. Alright, that might be a bit harsh, but honestly, go on a weekend retrospective on this and System Shock and tell me that they're still as good as they used to be. I bet you can't. Instead, let's remember Half-Life as it was, a game that should be remembered for what it went on to become, instead of playing it again and seeing how ropey it is. Number 1, Metal Gear Solid 5, The Phantom Pain, KONAMI. It's easy to pick holes in the prolonged development time and the infamous split between Konami and Hideo Kojima, but that's not why I'm here today. No, I'm going to tackle something that really needs to be shouted from the rooftops. Metal Gear Solid does not need a live service component. Sadly, that's what Metal Gear Solid 5 was infiltrated with as a result, with its mother base and item development costs. Now, if you've been playing since day one, this wouldn't be too much of an inconvenience. The former can largely be ignored, whilst the latter is pretty achievable if you've been keeping up with your side missions. But for anyone jumping in now, it's one hell of a climb to get anywhere near the top tier equipment. Jumping into any of the PvP mother base stuff will be difficult, and as the online part coincides with the always-on weapon development, it'll be a severe disadvantage to anyone wanting to max their gear out. Whatever happened to the days of on-site weapons and procurement, eh? And that's our list. Have you played any games recently and realised this isn't as good as I remember? Leave us a comment below and let us know. Give us a thumbs up if you enjoyed, and if you haven't already, click that subscribe button. I've been Kirsten from WhatCulture, and you know what, I'm just going to give Half-Life another chance. I mean, maybe I was just overreacting and oh god, was there always no music? Why are all the sound effects so bloody loud?